Today is February 17, 2018, and we are going to continue on last night's discussion regarding experience. So let's start with asking our Heavenly Family to help us to understand the subject. Heavenly Family, thank you so much for this message. Thank you for the truth. Thank you for the testimonies. Please help us to advance. Help us to go beyond our present attainments of knowledge and to really get it and to be reformed by these principles. Help us to know what it really means to gain a genuine experience and help us to think in the right way. Also, please prepare us for the new moon meeting tomorrow. Help us to all be fit to understand the message that you have to give us.
Amen.
Thank you. We ask what we do, B'Shem Tzemach, Hu He, in the name of Branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so, as I'm sure you all know, we are studying Experience Not Reliable, which is a section in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3, pages 67. Let me just make sure it's 67.
It is.
67 to 79. That's right. And we are currently on page 75. So, quick recap. This testimony is about true experience and false experience. False experience is what people generally call experience, merely going through a circumstance and having a perception of it and drawing conclusions based upon it. And that type of experience is what Ellen White is referring to as unreliable. Genuine experience, on the other hand, is knowledge derived from a variety of careful experiments. These experiments are said by Ellen White to be actual experiments in harmony with natural law and science. The regular experience, so-called experience, that we all go through from day to day, is unreliable. It is often just the result of habit or indulgence, thoughtlessly and frequently ignorantly followed. Often we have superstitious ways of thinking, and this does not help us to come to a knowledge of the truth. So anyway, we've been talking about all of these various principles and how they apply and have been having great discussion on it. One of our reasons for going through this testimony is not only to get a better understanding of experience in general, but also in order to correct our views of science in general, because most of us, in one way or another, have had anti-science perspectives and have viewed science and the scientific community with some degree of negativity, and that has been influenced by conspiratorial thinking and so on. You know, that's certainly true for me, and it's true for most, if not all, here. And so this is a point upon which we ought to examine ourselves. And here we meet a perspective in this testimony which radically differs from the perspective held by most people who profess to believe in the inspiration of the author of this testimony, aka Adventists, including Davidians and Branches. in that this testimony really advocates the scientific method, and it advocates for us to yield our own perspectives based on our own experience in favor of the perspectives of people who are specialists and who have gained scientific experimental knowledge. This is quite apparent through the testimony. This testimony, if people were to really study it and understand it, it should be a real eye-opener. And hopefully that is what it has been to all of us here. So, there's a lot more that could be said on it, I know, but I'm just going to ask if anyone has any comments or questions on this testimony or our discussion of it so far. And if no one mentions anything within the next 10 seconds, then we will just continue on in the testimony. All right. Well, as I mentioned, we are on page 75. And as a reminder, the context of this testimony is that Ellen White is writing to a woman who has some health issues and is basically doing the whole thing of, I know my body, and she's going off of her own experience in order to determine what she needs to do to benefit her health. And Ellen White is counseling her not to do that, but instead to come to the Health Institute and to follow the advice of the professionals. And Ellen White, in this section that we are reading now, is going through some of the specifics regarding this woman's bad choices that she has made in harmony with her experience, but which are in conflict with the best advice of health professionals in Ellen White's day. And as Teresa pointed out last night, in reading this, we ought to avoid what might be our tendency to read this in search of health advice, because that's not what it's about. The principle is to go with the best health authorities of our day, not of Ellen White's day. And so the health advice that Ellen White gave in harmony with the professionals of her day was the best of her day, but it's not the best of our day. So we ought to read it in search for the principles, which Ellen White is making quite plain. So it's not like we have to search hard to find the principles, but that's what we have to have our eyes really open to, rather than thinking, oh, well, Ellen White said this to this woman about what she should do for her health, or Ellen White was speaking against this woman doing this one practice or whatever. That shouldn't be our focus. Our focus should be the principle.
Shall I just quickly reference why we keep saying that, she said to go with the best health authorities of the day? Some people might be listening to this now or later and not be familiar with that. We've addressed it.
Before reading that, though, I just want to say that is something, that principle is apparent in this testimony that we're going through, because she's telling the woman, don't go with your own experience, go with these, what these professionals have to say, because they have this experimental knowledge. So the statement that you're about to read is a really good one to read in this, but I just wanted to remind everyone that even without any other statement, this is what we have, just even from the testimony that we're going through. But yeah, go for it.
Okay, it can be found in Gospel Workers, page 242, paragraph 3. It can also be found in Counsels on Health, page 566, paragraph 3. And it's in Gospel Workers 1892 edition, page 175, paragraph 4. So, do you want me to read it?
Oh, yes, please.
Our workers should use their knowledge of the laws of life and health. They should study from cause to effect. Read the best authors on these subjects and obey religiously that which your reason tells you is truth. So there's more in the context there, but basically, she's explaining how wonderful the mechanism of the human body is, and that we need to be, taking care of it, and that we should study from cause to effect and read the best authors on these subjects, etc.
So in Entering Wedge Part 2, Victor Houteff was pointing out that the best authors on these subjects in our day are different from the best authors in her day, and he gave a more detailed description of that in commentary on Ellen White's statement. Of course, we've talked about it in the past, too.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this last part, Ellen White is getting into specifics dealing with this woman's case, and in principle, she's saying, hey, you have been doing X, but your experience is not reliable in this. I'll read the last paragraph that we read last night and then continue on into this next one. So this is the first paragraph of page 75. Your habit of riding out in the open air in sunshine has been very beneficial. Your life out of doors has sustained you so that you have the measure of physical strength that you now enjoy. But you have neglected other exercise, which was even more essential than this. You have depended upon your carriage to go even a short distance. You have thought that if you walked even a little way, it would injure you, and you have felt weary in doing so. But in this, your experience is not reliable. That's where we ended last night. Now, continuing on with the next paragraph. The same power of motion which you exercise in getting in and out of a carriage and in going up and down stairs could just as well be exercised in walking and in performing the ordinary and necessary duties of life. You have been very helpless in regard to domestic duties. You have not felt that you could have the care of your husband's clothes or of his food. Now, my sister, this inability exists more in your imagination than in your inability to perform. You think it will weary and tax you to do this and that, and it does. But you have strength that, if put to a practical and economical use, would accomplish much good and make you far more useful and happy. You have so great a dread of becoming helpless that you do not exercise the strength with which the Lord has blessed you. In many things, you have helped your husband. At the same time, you have taxed his patience and strength. When he has thought that you could change some of your habits and improve, you have felt that he did not understand your case. Your friends have felt that you might be more useful in your home and not so helpless. This has grieved you. You thought they did not understand. Some have unwisely pressed their opinion of your case upon you, and this too has grieved you. You have felt that God, in answer to prayer, would help you, and you have many times been helped in this way. But you have not gained that physical strength which it is your privilege to enjoy, because you have not performed your part. You have not worked in full union with the Spirit of God. The Lord has given you a work to do which he does not propose to do for you. You should move out from principle in harmony with natural law, irrespective of feeling. You should begin to act upon the light that God has given you. You may not be able to do this all at once, but you can do much by moving out gradually in faith, believing that God will be your helper, that He will strengthen you. You could exercise in walking and in performing duties requiring light labor in your family, and not be so dependent upon others. The consciousness that you can do will give you increased strength. Okay, that you can do, like basically you can act.
Mm-hmm.
If your hands were more employed and your brain less exercised in planning for others, your physical and mental strength would increase. Your brain is not idle, but there is not corresponding labor on the part of the other organs of the body. Exercise, to be of decided advantage to you, should be systematized and brought to bear upon the debilitated organs that they may become strengthened by use. The movement cure is a great advantage to a class of patients who are too feeble to exercise, but for all who are sick to rely upon it, making it their dependence while they neglect to exercise their muscles themselves, is a great mistake. The movement cure, I'm pretty sure, is like other people moving your limbs and different things like that, because she's contrasting it with exercising yourself and moving yourself to improve your strength. Thousands are sick and dying around us who might get well and live if they would, but their imagination holds them.
They fear that they will be made worse if they labor or exercise, when this is just the change they need to make them well. Without this, they never can improve. They should exercise the power of the will, rise above their aches and debility,
Engage in useful employment, and forget they have aching backs, sides, lungs, and heads. Neglecting to exercise the entire body or a portion of it will bring on morbid conditions. Inaction of any of the organs of the body will be followed by a decrease in size and strength of the muscles, and will cause the blood to flow sluggishly through the blood vessels. If there are duties to be done in your domestic life, you do not think it possible that you could do them, but depend upon others. Sometimes it is exceedingly inconvenient for you to obtain the help you need. You frequently expend double the strength required to perform the task in planning and searching for someone to do the work for you. If you would only bring your mind to do these little acts and family duties yourself, you would be blessed and strengthened in it, and your influence in the cause of God would be far greater. God made Adam and Eve in paradise and surrounded them with everything that was useful and lovely. He planted for them a beautiful garden. No herb, nor flower, nor tree was wanting which might be for use or ornament. The Creator of man knew that the workmanship of his hands could not be happy without employment. Paradise delighted their souls, but this was not enough. They must have labor to call into exercise the wonderful organs of the body. The Lord had made the organs for use. Had happiness consisted in doing nothing, man, in his state of holy innocence, would have been left unemployed. But he who formed man knew what would be for his best happiness, and he no sooner made him than he gave him his appointed work. In order to be happy, he must labor. God has given us all things to do. In the discharge of the various duties which we are to perform, which lie in our pathway, our lives will be made useful, and we shall be blessed. Not only will the organs of the body be strengthened by exercise, but the mind also will acquire strength and knowledge through the action of these organs. The exercise of one muscle, while others are left with nothing to do, will not strengthen the inactive ones any more than the continual exercise of one of the organs of the mind will develop and strengthen the organs not brought into use. Each faculty of the mind and each muscle has its distinctive office, and all require to be exercised in order to become properly developed and retain healthful vigor. Each organ and muscle has its work to do in the living organism. Every wheel in the machinery must be a living, active, working wheel. Nature's fine and wonderful works need to be kept in active motion in order to accomplish the object for which they were designed. Each faculty has a bearing upon the others, and all need to be exercised in order to be properly developed. If one muscle of the body is exercised more than another, the one used will become much the larger and will destroy the harmony and beauty of the development of the system. A variety of exercise will call into use all the muscles of the body. Those who are feeble and indolent should not yield to their inclination to be inactive, thus depriving themselves of air and sunlight, but should practice exercise out of doors in walking or working in the garden. They will become very much fatigued, but this will not injure them. You, my sister, will experience weariness, yet it will not hurt you. Your rest will be sweeter after it. Inaction weakens the organs that are not exercised, and when these organs are used, pain and weariness are experienced because the muscles have become feeble. It is not good policy to give up the use of certain muscles because pain is felt when they are exercised. The pain is frequently caused by the effort of nature to give life and vigor to those parts that have become partially lifeless through inaction. The motion of these long disused muscles will cause pain because nature is awakening them to life. Walking, in all cases where it is possible, is the best remedy for diseased bodies, because in this exercise all the organs of the body are brought into use. Many who depend upon the movement cure could accomplish more for themselves by muscular exercise than the movements can do for them. In some cases, want of exercise causes the bowels and muscles to become enfeebled and shrunken, and these organs that have become enfeebled for want of use will be strengthened by exercise. There is no exercise that can take the place of walking. By it, the circulation of the blood is greatly improved. The active use of the limbs will be of the greatest advantage to you, Sister N. You have had many notions and have been very sanguine, which has been to your injury. While you fear to trust yourself in the hands of the physicians and think that you understand your case better than they do, you cannot be benefited but only harmed by their treatment of your case. Unless physicians can obtain the confidence of their patients, they can never help them. If you prescribe for yourself and think you know what treatment you should have better than the physicians do, you cannot be benefited. You must yield your will and ideas and not rein yourself up to resist their judgment and advice in your case. May the Lord help you, my sister, to have not only faith, but corresponding works.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually the end of the testimony. I wasn't planning to actually read the whole thing, but it seemed to be the best to get the full context, especially since so much of it was dealing with the specifics of her case, and there were just little lines of clear statement of principle interwoven throughout. And those principles are ones which we have already discussed. And then at the end, of course, there's a bit more of a focus on the principle. And I just want to point out how clearly she states this. She's really counseling for this woman not to diagnose herself. She uses the word prescribe for yourself, or the phrase prescribe for yourself. Really, it's, saying, oh, I'm going to prescribe this treatment, which, of course, includes, oh, I think this is my own problem, and I'm going to do this to solve it, prescribing our own treatment. And she's saying not to do that, and to do what the physicians advise her to do. And she's pointing out that if you will not put confidence in your physicians, you cannot be helped. You cannot be benefited unless you yield your own ideas and follow their advice.
Yeah, I don't know how much more plain a statement you could find in Ellen White's writings to show that she was not anti-doctor.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, absolutely. So, since we've read this and we've discussed so much of the principle, I just want to ask now, does anyone have any comments on this after reading the rest of the testimony, or questions related to this subject at all?
I have a comment to make. We were just talking today about how science is always changing, and how we're not supposed to go by all of Ellen White's health advice from 150 years ago because it's science. But what was interesting with what you had just read is that essentially what I took away from that was what it meant to me was physical therapy, which I have to go through and do again. And it's just very fascinating because it's well, physical therapy, was that even a term that was used back then? But and I'm going to say the majority probably of all pain management and rehab specialists, the first thing they're going to tell you is go do exercise. It's going to be maybe very limited, and you can only do certain type of movement, and you have many, many restrictions, but it's still no, actually you have to move. You're not supposed to not move. And so I just think that's really cool that she said that, because that is true back then as it is true today. And unfortunately, with doing chiropractic for 7 or 8 years, I was never advised, not a single time ever, to do physical therapy, ever, not once. And it's really upsetting and annoying. It's wow, I could have possibly fixed this problem within the last 7 years, or 8 or 9. Actually, it's been 9 years. I'm sorry. And I could have done that, but I didn't because I was afraid of doctors, because everybody told me that they were the people that were of influence around me were very, very anti-doctors. So I didn't want to take anything that of what they had to say as any grain of truth, because to me doctors were all sorcerers, which I mean that's very illogical to think of that. But at least now I know, I guess. But I just think it's really sad that a lot of us that have gone to chiropractors, or a lot of us that do struggle with pain, haven't gone through physical therapy, or maybe not have had the opportunity to do that, because it's so extremely beneficial to me. And learning, I have had to learn how to re-walk, and how to learn how to walk up the stairs and bend correctly, and all these things that we just you don't really take into account, that you're moving in a bad way until someone corrects you and tells you, no, you should try it this way. And now my body's changing. I actually quit physical therapy for 2 months because I injured myself. I overstretched. and I was just exhausted from like running around, going to physical therapy and then work and all that. So I stopped for 2 months, and 3 weeks ago I started back up again. And when I went back, I was just baffled at all the strength that I lost, that I had worked for so many months, for like five months of physical therapy, and getting better again. And I was just I was so mad that like I didn't keep up with it because I lost it so fast. But now that I've gone through 3 weeks of doing it 3 to 5 days a week, like I've actually have been able to rebuild those muscles a lot more quickly this time around. So I, I really relate to what you had just read, and so that's been my experience with physical medicine, at least.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, it's a good thing to point out that even though, yeah, we shouldn't go with like we shouldn't say that just because Ellen White gave a certain bit of advice in regard to health, that for that reason it's valid. It's not to say that it's all invalid. And so far as I know, the basic things that Ellen White was conveying in this testimony are still backed by science today. And science has really formed a far more detailed understanding of it, because so far as I know, physical therapy as physical therapy didn't really exist in Ellen White's day. But like you said, like today, if you got physical therapy, like there's a lot of specific things that they can tell you to do for certain conditions and things to avoid. And it's like a far more detailed knowledge on it, but it still has that general principle of, yeah, you want to move the various parts of your body and make sure it doesn't just sit there, or different muscle groups being unused or whatever. I can also relate to the same thing. I mean, when I was a teenager, I totally neglected taking care of my body because I was just focused on music and whatever, and I wasn't at all into sports, and I neglected stretching and all of that. And so for years, I haven't been able to touch my toes with my legs straight just by bending down. Like I've been really, really not flexible. And there have been times where I have tried, doing whatever stretching, just stretching and whatever, guessing on the right ways to stretch. And even, for periods, doing it consistently for a while and not having much success. And then recently, it's like, oh man, yeah, let's look up some physical therapy stuff on this. And so I started doing that, not only for just stretching in general, but also for my neck, because I have had so many neck problems and upper back problems.
Yeah, recurring injuries in the same way.
Where something will happen, or maybe I'll sleep in a wrong way or whatever, and then I'll just have my neck become really, really tense and painful, where I can't really do anything for a week or more. And it's like, man, I just can't afford to do that, to become immobilized like that. And so it's like, okay, physical therapy time. And since doing this physical therapy stuff, I haven't had any problems with my neck. And like, oh man, just my motion, just how I feel in general is a lot better. And within a couple of days, I was so shocked. Like I could actually reach down and touch my toes and touch the floor with my legs straight. And like, I didn't even think that I was going to be able to do that. And I was just like, oh, I wonder how far I am from being able to do that now. And to my shock, I reached down and touched my toes and touched the floor. And I know it's like totally a silly thing, but I was super excited about it because it's like, wow, it's been years since I've done this. And it's like, man, science works. Like, that's the thing. It really does work because it's based on genuine experiment, and physical therapy is the science of, well, obviously it's kind of self-explanatory, but physically moving our bodies right and doing it in a therapeutic way to resolve physical conflicts or whatever, injuries even. Obviously, it's very broad and it depends exactly on what the problem is, but yeah, it's awesome.
Occupational therapy is also, for people who may be listening to this and they think, oh, well, maybe I need physical therapy. There's physical therapy and there's occupational therapy, and if a person has some kind of injury or whatever, a doctor, a general practitioner would probably know who to refer a person to, whether it would be occupational or physical therapy. And we won't try to go into the explanation of what is what right now, at least I'm not intending to, but just wanted to mention, in case people are wondering about that sort of thing, just to point you in the right direction of what to ask about or what to look into.
Totally.
But the thing, just getting back to the principle of the matter, the thing that I love about this testimony is that while it has a tremendous potential to benefit us directly through our health, the more important thing even, although health is really important, but mental health is important too. And being able to just think rightly about things is going to make us mentally healthier as we continue to exercise our mind in right ways, in right activities, just like we want to exercise our bodies in right ways and right movements, right activities. We want to do that with our mind, and as we do that, it will strengthen our mind, and we will get better and more efficient even in our thinking process and our reasoning capabilities. And then there's the aspect of just harboring ill will toward people and thinking that it's okay because, oh, they're a doctor or they prescribe prescription medication. And, we have for so long as a people, it's like a big deal in the Adventist movement, in a large circle of Adventists, to be anti-doctor. Now, there are a lot of Adventist doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Certain communities are going to be pro-doctor as long as it's an Adventist doctor. But even in Adventism, and maybe even especially in Adventism, you can find some form of healthcare practitioner that will go through the medical training and education, but still hold to the traditional kind of conspiratorial way of thinking and employ pseudo-scientific methods with, good intentions, all of that. And the reason I know is because I was one of them. I was a massage therapist for 17 years, and I practiced as much pseudoscience as you can think of, just about. I mean, I did draw the line in a few things, like I never did Reiki, but I may as well have. I thought energy fields were real and, as far as like chi and that sort of thing, some life force. And I thought that I knew something about diseases and how to kind of figure out what was wrong with a person and that sort of thing. Well, you know what? Maybe once in a while I got lucky and I helped people. But I recognize now that I was so far overstepping my bounds, and I was completely into pseudoscience, and I'm so grateful now to know better. And it took time for me to totally be accepting of just how wrong I was, because I was in it because I wanted to help people. How could I go wrong with that? I was sincere, and all these different things would go through my mind to try to tempt me to hold on to that way of thinking and not be willing to just give it up and admit how wrong I was. But let me tell you, it was so worth it to actually end up doing that. I have so much like peace in knowing that I am now teachable in that regard, because I've mentioned this many times before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. You know, it always seems so strange to me, how in the world is the devil going to try to deceive Adventists through spiritualism? We all know that the soul isn't separate from the body. There's no thing, no ethereal essence that has any kind of consciousness or is sleeping, you know, it's like sleeping, but you're just dead. You know, your body is your soul, basically.
Although I think a lot of Adventists do think that we do have this ethereal thing that's a separate part of us that is just sleeping.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, but, you know, it always seems so confusing to me, like, how does the devil think he's going to fool an Adventist with spiritualism? Well, if you haven't listened to the New Moon study called Micah 1-3 and Spiritualism, I highly recommend that you do. It's very lengthy, but it's so important. These practices in the health industry, so-called, are so full of spiritualism. And, of course, another word for that is immateriality. And there is nothing more needed in our lives than a correct understanding of materialism. And once we can come fully on board with that and give up all of our immaterial ways of thinking, i.e. give up all of the spiritualistic things, the spiritualism, that's where we're going to be protected from that deception totally consuming us, you know? And that's why it's such a pivotal point of the message, and where some people have fallen away because of it, because it will sift between, you know, to use a biblical term, the wheat and the chaff. You know, if we're not willing to separate from our spiritualistic ideas, we will be separated from God's people, and thus separated from God, you know, because, well, I don't need to explain that. But anyway, yeah, I just really want to encourage everyone, if you find yourself holding on to any of these immaterial ways of thinking, or if you don't know, like, okay, well, what are the immaterial ways of thinking? You can listen to the study Micah 1-3 and Spiritualism. You can listen to Reforming Health, Reform, and Thinking, another study we have on YouTube. You can read the Entering Wedge Part 2 by Victor Houteff, or listen to the audiobook, which is posted on YouTube. And you can read the Silver Trumpet Volume 1, Number 9, which covers many different avenues through which spiritualism and immateriality infiltrates our way of thinking and behaving. But let me tell you, if you can really get on board with materialism, that is just going to do the devil in, because I've said this before too, reason is the devil's worst nightmare. Like, if you can reason, you're going to be able to recognize the deceptions, and then it's just a matter of choosing the right from that point.
There's one other thing I want to mention also. Rachel had mentioned about how science keeps changing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reminded me of a recent article published on sciencebasedmedicine.org by Harriet Hall called Answering Our Critics Again. And in this article, she lists 37 objections that people bring against science-based medicine, and just gives a short paragraph in reply to each of them. And I think it's a great article. I shared it on Facebook. And number 18 in that article is this, the fact that science keeps changing, and of course it's used as an argument against science. And I like her reply. She says, yes, and that's a good thing. Scientific conclusions are always provisional. We follow the evidence wherever it leads, and we often have to change course as new evidence becomes available. CAM, complementary and alternative medicine, refuses to change its mind even in the face of clear evidence. Scientific medicine stops using treatments if they are proven not to work. CAM never rejects any treatment and hardly ever tests one of its treatments against another to see which is superior. So I just like how she's pointing out, yeah, science does keep changing, and that is a good thing because new evidence needs to actually impact the direction we go in, the conclusions we hold to, and how we go about doing medicine. So
the same thing with present truth.
Absolutely. Same thing with present truth. So are there any other comments or questions?
I just had a comment or question about vaccination. And somehow I just thought that Seventh-day Adventists are against vaccination, but then I found that at the General Conference Adventist Health Ministry website, and they say they don't against it, but just at church in general, most people, or even among us, and we were against it somehow. So it's just my comment. If you have any feedback about it.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree with your observation that most people that I run into anyway in Adventism and Davidia and all of that, and the branch tend to be against vaccinations. And that anti-vaccine perspective is typically rooted in some sort of conspiratorial thinking. It typically has a political basis rather than a scientific basis. In fact, I'm not aware of anyone, I don't think I've ever met anyone or talked to anyone who actually gave a scientific basis and actually believed it because of some sort of scientific basis rather than a political thing. Like,
you've never heard someone say, well, scientific, I'm saying, like, related to health aspect is how it's equated in my mind. You know, people say, oh, well, there's mercury, there's this and that, this unhealthy thing in the vaccine.
Right. No, I've heard people use health-related arguments, but I've never met anyone whose basis for their anti-vaccine perspective is a scientific basis.
Right. Yes. Okay, good.
So,
that helped me understand better what you were saying, even though it should have been clear. But yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad that you pointed out, though, because, yeah, people do bring up arguments that are health-related arguments. But anyway, yeah, and like you said, also, not all Adventists are anti-vaccine or anything like that, and the General Conference tends to take more neutral positions on things, and
just like the General Conference isn't against keeping the feast days, but
right,
try to do that in your church.
Yeah, so it's when it comes to vaccines, clearly science-based medicine. That's great. Anyway, the joys of speech, or lack thereof. Anyway, science-based medicine advocates are unanimously in favor of vaccines as being safe and effective. It's not to say that it's claimed that vaccines don't need to be tested. No, the point is that vaccines are tested before they ever go out to the public and should be tested and so on. But I just recommend for everyone to look up vaccines using science-based medicine resources. And, you know, I certainly cannot advocate any sort of anti-vaccine mindset at all. And not that this, what I'm about to say, not that this is any sort of evidence in favor of vaccines or anything like that, but it should be something that should cause someone to question their own perspective who's a Davidian, to realize that Victor Houteff was actually asked about vaccines, and he said that we know of nothing against them. This is actually in Victor Houteff's card files, which unfortunately are not yet accessible to most people, but it's one of the things that we have on our many things to-do list, is to make Victor Houteff's card files accessible. And he was asked a question concerning vaccines, and someone said, hey, I think it was like their son or something, there was going to be a compulsory vaccine. And the question was, well, should we go through with this? And Victor Houteff said, well, you know, of nothing against vaccines, and if it's compulsory, it's compulsory. And I was like, go ahead and do it. And that, I think, would just be shocking to most Davidians, because most Davidians are anti-vaccine. Now, of course, Victor Houteff was just going with the best available information that he had, and that doesn't mean that the best available information that he had is correct. But in this case, according to science-based medicine, it is correct. So, anyway, I know that we have many things to learn and many, many things to unlearn, but let's always remember the principles and not allow any sort of biases to influence our investigation, and just be willing to follow the scientific evidence wherever it leads.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we should wrap up the meeting for tonight. So, would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family, and then we'll end the meeting for tonight?
I'll pray. Heavenly Family, thank you for being you, and thank you for making us and loving us and designing us and teaching us. Please continue to shape us and go with each of us as we strive to grow, unlearn, relearn, whatever it takes. And please continue to feed us as we come back tomorrow. Please continue to strive with us as we overcome ourselves and this world. We pray all things in the name of the branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Love you all. Have a good night, and look forward to tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah, happy new moon, everyone. Blessings.
Happy New Moon.
Let us hope.